Hello and welcome back to Scottish Independence Podcasts. We're going to bring you an event that was organised by Pensioners for Indy in Glasgow, which I wasn't at because I was away on holiday, but you were there, Marlene, weren't you? So tell us about the event we're going to hear.
Yes. She went off on holiday and I had to do it all on my own, which was a little bit nerve-wracking because it's usually Fiona who does the actual filming. However, it was fine, managed it. Yeah, Colin Fox of the Scottish Socialist Party. We've talked to Colin once or twice before. He's always a really, really interesting guy to listen to. He's got a lot of facts at his fingertips. He thinks things through. He can go into details, but he also is very good at standing back and giving you the bigger picture. And I think that's what he did in the meeting with the Glasgow pensioners. And we've called it Scottish Politics in Flux.
Yeah, and the timing in particular, when this interview took place, it was right in the middle of the Hamilton by-election. So at that point, they didn't know who was going to win, obviously. But what we did know was that the political landscape was very, very different from the past. And at that point, quite unpredictable.
Yeah, indeed. And it's probably no surprise for you to learn that none of us in the room thought that Labour were going to win it.
Mm.
So, and then, they slipped through.
To be fair, neither did they.
Neither did they, probably. Neither did they, probably. So, they slipped through between SNP and between Reform, and look at how well Reform did. So, yeah, changing face of Scottish politics in flux. Here it is.
I wanted to say that I'm delighted to be here, and as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure I can say it again, the Scottish Socialist Party is happy to give you any support we can at any time. It's nice to speak to you, and our support and congratulations for your work that you do, I think, is in order, because the goal of achieving independence for Scotland takes a great deal of effort and time. Mary was reminding you of all the things I've been involved in, and I have to say, uppermost in all the campaigns I've been involved in the past 40 years was the 2014 referendum campaign, which was fantastic. I know you were involved in it. I look towards that. That's the high water mark of politics, because 80% of people participated in that, as you remember. Yeah. I'd like to tell you that the participation next Thursday in Hamilton was going to be 80%, but it's probably likely to be 30% from what I can gather. But anyway, it was a fantastic time to be alive, and I'll touch on that in a second. I thought I would come here today, and I know my P's and Q's. I wouldn't dream of coming here today and showering you with platitudes, or even explaining to a group, the Pensioners for Independence, the importance of independence. We know that already, don't we? We're committed to it. You know more about it than I do, and we're all committed to independence. So I thought the best thing I could do on this occasion is to try and engage our old grey matter and discuss the key questions that are in front of the independence movement, that we're all considering. How are we going to get independence? When are we going to get it? What are the impediments to our objective? That kind of thing. And I look forward to making that contribution in a second. But I thought I'd start, and I'm sure you forgive me for just re-illustrating the Scottish Socialist Party's often overlooked contribution to the independence cause and the campaign. The Scottish Socialist Party's been around for 30 years now. We stand for an independent socialist Scotland, and we want a modern democratic republic. And we're not going to stop till we get it. That's the kind of determination that we have. In our political tradition, the tradition that socialist belongs to stretches back to the one and only John Maclean from this city, and the one and only James Connolly from the city of Edinburgh, whose tradition was a socialist tradition in favour of self-determination, which they considered to be a national liberation struggle. And that was in the 1900s, in the 1910s, in the 1920s, even before my granny and granda were born. And that's a noble tradition, and it goes back to times that we should talk about some more. I wonder often, I've got two kids, I'm sure you've got kids and grandkids, and you wonder in Glasgow whether they've ever heard of John Maclean, in the city of Edinburgh if they've ever heard of James Connolly, and they haven't. And therefore there's an obligation on us to reacquaint them, or to acquaint them for the first time, and tell them what people told you about the role that people John Maclean did the contribution they made, both of those men, there's a lot of men and women together, both of those men died way before their time as young men committed to a struggle. It was a noble struggle, and it's worthwhile, even though John Maclean died in 1923, James Connolly died in Dublin in 1916, etc., but they left a really strong and important legacy of writing, and their contribution is as valid today, in my opinion, as it ever has been. And a lot of youngsters, your grandparents' generation, is just as valuable for them to delve into that as it was for us way back then. So if you're a supporter of John Maclean and a supporter of James Connolly, as I am, that makes you an anti-capitalist. They weren't in any way, shape or form prepared to accept capitalism, because for them and for the Scottish Socialist Party, it's a system based on exploitation. It's ruthless. It is murderous. And to say that the capitalist system in 2025 is more powerful than it was in 1925, well, it's true, but it doesn't free it from the accusations that this is a system that exploits the people of Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Motherwell, Wharamfey, actually throughout the world. That's what Maclean pointed to, what James Connolly points to, and if you'll allow me, it's what I've been trying to point to in the streets of Larkhall, Stonehouse and Hamilton for the past few weeks in the course of this by-election. That by-election will come and go and it'll change nothing. But the system that exploits the people that live there, puts them in an early grave, tells them that the Wishaw General has been privatised and that Hare Myers Hospital has been privatised. Facts that would make an Iron Bevan spin in his grave. We didn't build the health service so it could be owned by multinational corporations like the Sick Kids in Edinburgh that's owned by a company in Australia, Macquarie Capital Solutions. So you look at Maclean and John Maclean and James Connolly and the writings of the past, and you can see the seething anger that's there. And sometimes I look around this room, and one thing we've learned collectively, you have to be patient. You have to be patient. Often things can't be changed overnight. But there's nothing wrong with that seething anger. You know, like the phrase of Burns, nursing your wrath to keep it warm. You're right to have wrath. You're right to be angry. You know, that American socialist Bernie Sanders has written a book saying why it's still right to hate capitalism. And it's unfashionable. Although I heard him in Radio 4 this morning saying he spoke at a meeting in Los Angeles this week with 36,000 people. And he spoke at one in Denver, Colorado, the week before of 32,000 people. And you think, that must have been football stadiums or things like that, you know. You're not going to get all them into the back, is it? But he's, you know, he's out there in America, and it can't be easy. They've just elected Trump again, so it's no an easy sell, is it? But you're right. And I think my conviction that I wanted to convey to you is we support independence, and we're right. We didn't win the referendum, but we were right. We have the enlightened case. And if you took part in that referendum campaign, we had the fun, we had the verve, we were the ones who were out every day. We had the optimism that they're going to win. Okay, we didn't win. But the other side, misery upon misery. They hated chapping every door, they hated seeing every yes badge, they just wanted the thing to be over. And in the end, they celebrated, but it was that kind of meek celebration. Thank Christ for that. Never doing that again. And of course, that's their calculation. The thing is, I remember saying at the time, Marlene will tell you, at the time my view was this is, in 2014, this is independence deferred, not defeated, it's deferred. The Italian socialists have got this phrase, la lotta continua, which means the struggle continues. And the struggle for an independent Scotland continues, and that's what we're part of. And it's a joy to be part of.
Summits, but always higher than it.
Yeah, nobody says to you that you'll get it tomorrow. Nobody says the struggle will be an easy one. And sometimes it's like you learn from experience, a lot of experience in this room, that things that are harder to achieve or prouder, older, close to your heart, when you get them, you look after them better, don't you? If you think of an Iron Bevan in 1947-48, they set up the National Health Service, but people had been campaigning for something like that since Burns' time 150 years ago. The Chartists was 100 years before him, and they were arguing for it. So when you get it, you look after it, and you're more proud of it. You know, in Canada, the National Health Service there was set up by a Scotsman. Yeah, his name will come to me in a second when I remember it and the rest of it. I meet people over in Edinburgh when we're campaigning in Princess Street, Canadians all the time, and they talk about the health service that they've got in Canada. And of course, right across for the border in the United States, they've got no health service. 60 million Americans don't have any health care. And so it gives you the clear view. These are struggles that can be won and lost. And my fear is the NHS has been taken off of us. You know, it's no right that Scotland's got 8 national health hospitals that are owned by private companies. That's just no right. It's no acceptable, and the vast majority of people don't want it. But see, if I say to you about the Scottish Socialist Party's struggle for independence as part of a bigger picture, the Scottish Socialist Party doesn't see independence as an end in itself. It's a means to an end. We want an international, we want national liberation struggles. All those countries of the world that are struggling for their national liberation. It's right, and we can empathise. We can't do much about it because ultimately in a democracy you've got to do that for yourself. But we can set an example, which is to say in Scotland, we're going to achieve our independence and show we're fit to look after ourselves. We're fit to take decisions. There'll be hard decisions. Some of the hardest decisions in politics are between bad and badder. Bad and worse, no between good and easy, bad and easy. They're choices that you somehow have to take, but there's no good option. You know, they talk about that triage in the battlefield, don't they? Where sometimes you've got to take decisions where the best you can hope for is that people will get wounded rather than killed. They're not two good choices. So the Scottish Socialist Party's serious about independence, and I've never allowed the Scottish Socialist Party. That sounds like I've got some powers over the Scottish Socialist Party I don't have, but I never encouraged the idea that this isn't a serious struggle, that we're ever going to underestimate who's on our opponent's side, because we're attempting to overthrow the British state. That's the other side. It's not Jackie Baillie, it's not unionists, it's not no supporters. It's the British state who've made it absolutely clear, Colin, you're no getting independence. And Colin, you're no getting a second referendum. And Colin, we're in charge here. You'll know your place. Never mind the arguments which they say you're too wee, you're too stupid, you couldn't run it. Fundamentally, they're saying we are having Scotland as part of the Union because it's profitable to us, because the nuclear weapons are based here, and our UN Security Council seat is dependent upon that, and the British state is powerful. And okay, we're not the empire, but we're the 5th biggest economy in the world. So you underestimate us at your peril. And if you're stupid enough to underestimate us, then you'll be in the losing side again and again and again. And therefore, I'm not going to give them that opportunity. We know who we're fighting against. And if you've read your history, and I know you have, a lot of people, you've got their books at the back, the history of Ireland. Look what the Irish people went through. Ultimately, a civil war, because the British refused to allow there to be a united Ireland. In India, we've got friends of mine that are in the Scottish Socialist Party from Kashmir. And they're looking at 1947, the British decided, okay, we're getting out of India, but we're going to leave mayhem behind us. We're going to leave you with the message that only the white man could run this country. We're leaving it to you, and you're going to make an arse of it. You'll kill each other, etc. In other words, they left the ground for poisonous slaughtering between different religions, between different communities. And you look at Kashmir, the country divided into two. One half owned by India, one half owned by Pakistan. Then you've got religious divisions, etc. That's a direct result of what Britain did in 1947 and 48. And yesterday, I was in Hamilton. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Leader of Labour, came to Hamilton to be in their headquarters yesterday. So the Scottish Socialist Party were there with the Palestinian protesters, protesting about this is a Labour government that's not just supporting Netanyahu, not just complicit in what he's doing and annihilating 2.5 million people in the Gaza Strip. They're providing the weapons. They're providing the guns, etc. Enough to say that Angela Rayner ran away. She didn't turn up, right? Well, good riddance to bad rubbish as far as I'm concerned. But it's indicative of Britain was responsible for Palestine in 1947. So the British state has got blood in its hands. You know, as James Connolly, John McLean had the butcher's apron. They went round with the empire. The empire was built by the Royal Navy, going round and telling people in Hong Kong and Belize and the Caribbean and South America, Latin America, as well as Europe, we're in charge. We'll blutter you. We've got the strongest navy in the world, etc. Now, I'm not here to frighten you, simply to say that people with that resolve are hardly about to say, aye, Mary, you have independence. I've met you at the Bacchus. What a group. I'm getting in. No, you have what you want. That's not going to happen. We have to be serious about it. And I don't encourage anybody in the independence movement to be less than serious about who we're taking on, because otherwise we're not going to win. That's the truth of it. In the Scottish Socialist Party, briefly, we had 6 members of Parliament, as you'll remember. In 2003, we got the highest vote that any avowed socialist parties ever had in Scotland. So there was, 180,000 people voted for the Scottish Socialist Party, including in this city. We got 2 MSPs elected, as you remember, in Glasgow. And we're proud of the role that we played both inside the Parliament and outside. I say that because I got elected to the Parliament, and it's a long time ago, as you realise, 2003. First thing you have to do as a member of the Scottish Parliament is to swear an oath of allegiance to the Queen. Now it's the King. I'm in for a republic. I'm not bowing down to feudal relics, unrepresentative of the people. And some people said, oh, Colin, you just have to nod it through because the Queen's got no powers. Well, you're wrong. The Crown powers mean that no bill can be passed at Holyrood without their permission. The Army's loyalty is to the Queen. The Court's loyalty is to the monarchy. The monarchy in Britain has tremendous power. OK, it's held in abeyance. They don't use it every day. But it doesn't mean to say it's not there. And so the Scottish Socialist Party MSPs, as you know, protested that we had to take the oath of allegiance. Our oath and our allegiance was to the voters, to democracy, to the people who voted for us. I can reasonably assume that the Queen didn't vote for me. King Charles wouldn't vote for the Scottish Socialist Party, so we don't know what I'm in. And of course what they said is, well, chuck you out. If you refuse to take the oath, they chuck me out. And I was Fox F, they take you alphabetically, and they chucked me out for singing A Man's a Man for all that. You don't remember the details, but they sent me to the end, and I had to come in after Mr. Zinoviev at the end here, after the Z, right? And I came in and says, as I was saying earlier on, and if you see it on TV, I think my daughter still got it on video cassette somewhere, right? But the presiding officer at that time was David Steele. Do you remember him? And I'm singing, I'm concentrating and singing because I'm no great. I can sing a song, but I'm no great for remembering the words, right? So I'm concentrating, right? And apparently on the telly, you can hear it where David Steele's going, come on, you can't sing, right? He's meaning you're not allowed to sing in the Parliament. And the woman, the commentator's going, actually, he's not bad, we sing. So, but when I was in the Parliament, I never had the idea that this is where society was changed. That's a talking shop. It's like a public school boys, Oxford Union, the rest of it. So the Scottish Socialist Party's orientation when we were there is, we were on the streets as much as we were ever in the Parliament. We were out campaigning, supporting the nursery nurses, the firefighters, other people that were on strike, etc. And I don't want you to give the impression that somehow we skived. No, we were there every day. Our voting record and our participating in all the debates was better than anybody's, because for us it was our place of work. If you're at your work, you should be at your work. You're elected to be at your work. Your job is to represent, in my case, the people of the Lothians in Glasgow and elsewhere. So we were both in the Parliament and outside the Parliament. And I'm proud to sit here in front of you and say it was the Scottish Socialist Party bill in 2000 that led to the abolition of pindings and warrant sales. Remember them? Absolutely shameful piece of Scottish history. A fairly unique method of debt recovery that was based entirely on the humiliation of poor people. They didn't get the money back. They just took Jean or Mary or me and they put all your stuff in the street and they went, no getting the money back, but we're going to humiliate poor people. Don't ever get into debt. That was the message they were sending. The Scottish Socialist Party, along with Dennis Canavan, John McCallion, others, remember them, got rid of pindings and warrant sales. We were also, as Mary mentioned, I put forward the bill to abolish prescription charges, which subsequently, as Mary said, the SNP took on the next time and they're abolished. And I had to remind people, prescription charges were introduced in 1951. So the health service was 1948. 3 years later, the Labour government introduced prescription charges to pay for the war in Korea. It was a shilling. It was a shilling regardless if you needed a bandage and a medicine and an inhaler, etc. The whole thing was a shilling. And then it grew and grew and grew. And you know, today in England, it's now £10 per item. Per item. £10 for a tablet, £10 for an inhaler, £10 for... Shocking. And so Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland abolished them. England still got them. So people in England have to pay for their prescriptions. Shocker. So we were part of the campaign, let's say, to abolish prescription charges, abolish pindings and warrant sales. We put in the bill to free school meals. We put forward a bill that wasn't successful to introduce free public transport as a way of combating climate change, etc. So we introduced more bills per capita than any other party when we were there. And at the same time, we were in picket lines, we were in community struggles in Pollok and in Govan and elsewhere. And the Scottish Socialist Party's proud of the role that we played. That's exemplary, you know, taking that work that we did seriously. And I have to say, one other thing that's not widely known about that period is we had left-wing political parties from all over the world, socialist parties from all over the world coming to visit us for those 4 years to work out how the Scottish Socialist Party had achieved this. How you got 6 MSPs elected, the highest vote any socialist get. And you know, in part the reason was because everywhere else they were going backwards. And see if you think that was right in 2003, 2007. Take a look at the newspapers today. In Portugal, the weekend before last, the right-wing neo-fascist party became second in the elections there. Look at Reform in Scotland. Look at Le Pen in France. Look at Italy. Look at Trump in America. Look at the politics of the last 20 years. It's been going to the right, not the left. Working people have been battered and battered. You know, trade unions have been battered and battered. Tenants' federations have been battered and battered. And that episode where they parties were coming, how did the Scottish Socialist Party, how was Scotland apparently, you know, against the stream? The whole world is going in that direction and the Scottish Socialist Party is going in the other. And I've thought about this a lot since then, because subsequently it's been very difficult to be a socialist in Scotland. And the reason for it between 2003 and 2007 actually was the poll tax struggle, because it's the last mass campaign of civil disobedience there's been in Britain. And it was out of that, 1991 is when the riots took place, etc. Brought down Thatcher, poll tax was scrapped, 16 million people, including most of yourselves, I'm sure, refused to pay it, and it was done in for. And I refer to that now, Mary, because see this question about how on earth are we going to get a second referendum? How are we going to get a second referendum when Westminster's told us you're not getting it? And when push comes to shove, best outcome in the world, Scotland will still have only 56 MPs out of 650. Arithmetically, it's not going to happen. And the answer isn't to run to the Supreme Court in London with some judge when he's wiggling, saying, "Going to let us have a mere referendum," etc. The answer is civil disobedience. It's going to make them an offer, as they say in The Godfather, we're going to make them an offer they can't refuse. We're going to stop paying our TV licence. We're going to stop paying our taxes. We're going to stop going along with, what is it, the British government's representative in Scotland and Atlantic Quay.
The Governor General.
Governor General, his pith helmet and his wee court singing for his helmet, I'm sure. In other words, the answer is we have to achieve independence democratically. I remember, you know, 2014, we were on Princes Street on the Friday. The referendum result was on the Friday, wasn't it? Came through on the Friday. So we were on Princes Street, and this man came along to us. I don't think he was all that politically experienced. I'll tell you for why. Because he was adamant that the result had been stole off us, that we had won, and that we'd been stole, they'd pockled the result, as they might say in Motherwell. And he had in his phone a picture, and he's got a picture on the table. It's yes and no ballot papers all there together. And he says, "See, all the yes votes in the no pile." And I goes, "Listen, mate, you know when they empty the black box? They pour them in, that's what that is, right? There's yes and no in the same box and all that." No, they're all yes votes in the no pile, we've lost it and all that. I says, no, we lost. And the reasons for it will come to in a second. We lost democratically, we're going to have to win democratically, right? He wouldn't believe it, he wouldn't accept that. I says, well, you know the conclusion you're forced to draw on your side of this equation, if you don't accept there's a democratic way to achieve independence, you're going to have to get yourself an AK-47, go up the Pentlands and learn how to fire it, because that's what you're suggesting. And I'm no for that. I'm for a democratic will of the Scottish people. We're only going to get independence if we persuade the majority of the Scots, men and women, that it's going to make them economically, politically, socially, culturally better off. That's true then, it's true the new, it's true always will be. And for the challenge for people like us is we got to get a majority. In my view, we've never had it. So we can talk about that if you like. We've never had it. I didn't think we were going to win in 2014, if I'm honest with you. But we need a majority, and we need to sustain it. No, just as a one-off and a blip and all that. And we need to make sure it's prolonged. It's a majority, let's say 60% and 60% and 60%, month in, month out, as long as it takes. And having built up the majority, that's where the political power rests. And if you turn it and say, the reason Westminster turn around and say you're not getting a second referendum, they argue they've got the majority. And it's debatable. And if it's debatable, they're having it. We've got to prove that the alternative is the case, and that's the challenge in front of us. And the second thing I was going to touch on, Mary, really, in these remarks is, what is independence for? That's a profound question, isn't it? And I've seen, and I have to say, I have a worry in the independence movement, because the leaders of the movement don't believe it's about real change. And John Swinney's the First Minister, isn't he? Nicola was the First Minister beforehand. I know them well. Angus Robertson I know well. I know Humza. And they don't believe that independence offers a radical solution and radical change. They want to keep the pound. They want to keep the king. They want to keep NATO. They want to maintain the power and the corporations and the big energy companies. And my point of view and the Scottish Socialist Party's point of view, you're not going to eradicate the fact that 1 in 3 children in this city go hungry to bed at night. That 1 in 3 children in this city don't have a proper pair of shoes to wear in the snow in the winter, and they're going there in trainers. There's poverty, there's inequality, there's injustice, deeply, profoundly existing in Scotland. And unless the yes message is to say we're going to eradicate that, we're going to eradicate it, we're going to stop young laddies being sent for this country, even an independent country, to die in wars abroad, then unless you send that message, we're never going to win. Because the majority of people in Scotland are working class people, working hard every day, one pay packet away for the poorhouse. You know that's the case. They've no got a house that they're happy to live in. They've no got stability in their income. They've no got a future that's better for their kids than they had. And Bernie Sanders is on the day saying that in America, his generation are saying the 16, 17, 18-year-old, 19, 20-year-olds in America, their standard of living doesn't compare with it was when he was 16, 17 today, with all the riches that are there. So these profound inequalities, for me, have been at the heart of what independence is about. Independence is about transformative change, or it's about nothing. And if the leaders of the movement are saying, well, we're going to keep Standard Life or Aberdeen Asset Management in charge, Scottish Power will stay in charge, the big oil corporations will stay in charge, the people with all the money in this. Edinburgh, by the way, is the 5th richest financial centre in Europe. After London, Paris, Frankfurt and Milan, you've got Edinburgh, and they're going to keep the money. Well, you know, we know enough about politics is power and money go together. Democracy is a powerful instrument. But the power is in the corporations, the power is in the money men, the power is in the asset managers. And unless you're going to say is, we're going to keep these companies, but we're going to have them publicly owned. We're going to take the wealth and riches. You know, I grew up in Motherwell, and in Motherwell, in the 60s and 70s, the British Steel Corporation was nationalised, it was publicly owned. And everybody hated it. It was a murderous employer. They used to pollute the streets of Craigneuk where I live. My mum would put out the washing on a Monday, be covered in red ash. She'd have to take it down and wash it again on the Tuesday, etc. They had a workers' representative in the board of directors. But everybody in Motherwell's attitude is David Colville used to own the steel industry before 1948, and David Colville and his like still run it in 1968. That was nationalisation for bailing out corporate losses, just as we've seen with Scunthorpe, by the way. And the question is, when are we going to nationalise the profit-making companies and use the money that they make to build council houses, to provide proper wages, to eradicate the poverty in Edinburgh and Aberdeen and elsewhere, to transform this country into the one that people are looking for, which is to say, we can take for granted that my kid's life will be easier than me, that I don't have to drag myself out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to a cleaning job, finish it at 9 o'clock and do another job, and then finish at 4 o'clock before I put the kids to bed at 7 o'clock and do that's life, isn't it? I'm not telling anybody anything we don't know about what life is like in Glasgow. It's brutal, man. It's hard. And it's getting worse. It's going backwards. And that's my concern about the independence movement. Has to be a guarantee that child poverty will be eradicated in an independent Scotland. That nuclear weapons and the threat to annihilate the rest of the world will not take place under our watch. And we will not be sending our laddies to die in foreign wars. You know Hamish Henderson's famous poem, Freedom Come All Ye?
Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm sure you sing it and you listen to it and all that. There's a wonderful line in there where he talks about, and it's a heartbreaker if you're Scottish, it's a heartbreaker, man. And he talks about those kids, that wee laddie and wee lassie in Niagara. He's talking about Africa. It could just as easily be the Middle East, it could be wherever. And he talks about how they're terrified by the skirl of the bagpipes and the sight of the tartan, because for them it was associated with oppression, military operation and regiments and tank commanders in Iraq, etc. And you think to yourself, fucking hell, man. Imagine the world, anywhere in the world, that Scotland should be known for that. We want to be known as Kenny Dalglish or Scott McTominay or whiskey or shortbread or all the things, Burns, all the things that we give to the world. And yet, as part of the British state, we're associated with annihilation, with barbarism, with backwardness, by depression and oppression. That's terrible. And my conviction is independence has got to be part of ridding us of all that. And saying, as we saw in 2014, you know, we are entitled to say proudly, but without being chauvinist about it, between 2012 and 2014, Scotland was one of the most politicised places in the world. As politicised as Palestine, with all due respect, as politicised as the apartheid struggle in South Africa before it, politicised as anywhere else, because the country was focused on a very clear political choice about a direction they wanted to take, remaining part of a 300-year-old union and not that represented, or we were going to take the risk and say, well, this might not go well to begin with, but it's our decisions and we'll live with it. We get them right, we get them right. If we get them wrong, well, we got them wrong. And we put our hands up to it and say, well, they were our mistakes, they were honest mistakes, as opposed to being forced on us by anybody else. And I want Scotland to be a beacon to the rest of the world that says we represent values that were handed to us by Hamish Henderson, values handed to us by John Maclean and Connolly and others, fighting for liberation. But liberation from what? Liberation from the English monarchy. Not only. We want liberation from the exploitation of Standard Life and BP and Tesla, for that matter, and the idea that billionaires should make decisions. We like that. No, we want the billions to make decisions. That's what democracy is. It's a choice between, do the billions of people on the planet vote for something, and if they do, they would vote for things that are sharing out equally, aren't they, for everybody else. So I wanted to finish by asking you a question about whether or not you think independence is round the corner. And you can answer that in a second after I say this. And if your answer is it's not round the corner, then the question is, what do you do about it? And I raise that question because actually it's the same about socialism. Is socialism round the corner? Probably not. So if you're a socialist, what do you do? Go and do stamp collecting for 10 years and come back when somebody's done the hard work, etc.? Or do you roll up your sleeves and say, well, it's 10 years, it's 10 years. If there's no an easy path, then you take the only path that's there. And my feeling is I think the independence movement is currently in a consideration of where this might take some time. And therefore it's easy to see that it's organisationally and even intellectually weaker than it was in 2014. And we need to address that. Perhaps amongst the things that are most urgent for us to address is, why did we lose in 2014? We weren't pockled out the result. My view was the result, and we didn't convince the people of Scotland in a majority that our case was good enough. My response to that is, well then, no, we have to do precisely that. If that was we weren't able to convince them, then roll up your sleeves and start working at it. And that's where I take my hat off finally to yourselves, Mary. This group's existence, and you're continuing to do that, is the lifeblood of the independence movement. Your Stalls and Mulgai and Glasgow and everywhere else, in Edinburgh that we do. We're continuing to fly the flag when it's difficult. And you get respect for that. I get in Princes Street 3 times a week, and people come up to me and go, oh, I don't agree with a word you said, I've never agreed to a word you say, but I take my hat off to you. You're here every day. And I go, no, I'm not here every day, I'm just here 3 days a week. 3 days a week. No, but you're here every time I see you, and you don't see that in politics, etc. And I say, that's because I believe in it. I won't come here on a Monday and say I'm in favour of bringing back hanging. I won't come here on a Tuesday and pander to you and something else I don't believe. I won't turn up on a Tuesday and say I'm against independence, just elect me to the Parliament, etc. You can shove the Parliament. I've got values, I've got principles, this is what I stand for. You know, the Scottish Socialist Party MSPs lived on a worker's wage. When I was in the Parliament, the parliamentary salary in MSP was £55,000 a year. I got 25,000 because that was what nursery nurses and firefighters and teachers and people who elected me got, and the other 30,000 went into promoting the socialist cause or various causes, etc. We're committed to that. By the way, not an idea we invented. That was James Connolly's phrase. Rise with your class, not out of it. Don't get elected as an MSP coming from Drumchapel or Pollock or Easterhouse or wherever, and then we never see you for 4 years because you moved to Mount Vernon. You drive about in big flashy Mercedes, you go for 3 holidays a year to Benidorm or whatever.
The House of Lords.
Yeah, move to the House of Lords. The rest. That's. I'm sorry to say, that's the typical reputation that politicians have, you know. And some of them in this movement who've let us down rather badly in that regard have sold their soul. You know, parcel of rogues in a nation. Burns wasn't talking about the English, he was talking about the Scots who sold their soul to the other side, etc. And whatever else can be said about the many mistakes the Scottish Socialist Party might or might not have made, we haven't sold their soul. We're still here for 30 years. If it takes another 10 years, we'll still be there because we're committed to an independent socialist Scotland, a modern democratic republic. And with all due respect, if I can put this modestly, we're still right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm the Scottish Socialist Party, so you work this out for yourself. I'm no in the SNP, I've never been in the SNP, but I'm in the Hamilton by-election, Hamilton, Stonehouse, Larkhall. But I look at the SNP's materials, didn't mention independence.
No.
And that's up to them, the Scottish Socialist Party. Well, we're an independent socialist Scotland, modern democratic republic. We talk to that coming out of our ears and probably out of everybody else's ears. But the root of the problem, Tom, is this. I was in the Labour Party. I joined the Labour Party in Motherwell when I was 17. And Motherwell, by the way, had the first ever communist MP in Britain. Motherwell had the first ever SNP MP in Britain, Dr McIntyre, 1945. Keir Hardie was born in, let me say, Greater Motherwell. He was from Hollytown. Motherwell is 5 minutes up the road from New Lanark, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. One of the, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site because it's known as a utopian socialist complex established by Robert Owen, not David Owen, Robert Owen, 200 years ago. And yet in the Labour Party in Motherwell they know nothing, they didn't teach me any of my history, etc. And the Labour Party fell into a hole 100 years ago that the SNP's now ended up in, which is electoralism. The SNP are now much more interested in get MPs elected and MSPs elected and councillors elected and God knows what elected, and they do that on the basis that the SNP knows full well that a third of its vote does not support independence. So they're compromised here, big problem. If a third of your vote doesn't support independence and you need the third of them to get your seats and your salaries and your careers and your ministerial limousines, you fall down the hole that Labour fell down 100 years ago. If I can tell you this, see in 1900, I realise before anybody here was born, before your grandparents were even born, 1900 in Germany, the Labour Party's equivalent, called the Social Democrats, had 1 million members. They had 30 daily newspapers. They had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of full-time workers working for them. And they were considered a socialist party to 1900. By the way, they were considered a Marxist party. Their leader was a guy called Karol Kautsky, who Vladimir Lenin of the Bolsheviks, used to call the Pope of Marxism. Seems a bit confused to call him the Pope of Marxism, but anyway, he did. And they were the most powerful workers' movement in the world. In the 1900, they did a conference where they decided that what was more important was leave that socialism for a minute, Mary, they'll say. We need to get in the Parliament. We need to get in the Parliament. We need to have people in the Parliament arguing for parliamentary representation. We need MPs in the Parliament. And they went into the Parliament and they dumped their socialism. They've never been socialist since. But they've been in government hundreds of times, have achieved hee-haw. You know, I'm sure it wasn't easy when Hitler was in power in Germany, but they made the exact mistake that the SNP have made. And by the way, these are not the only two examples of social democracy. You either fight for what you believe in and don't compromise, or you get deflected into electoralism. In the SNP, all of a sudden, it's about getting the SNP candidate in Hamilton Stonehouse to replace Christine McKelvey and getting a majority in the Parliament in Holyrood, etc. Independence is an afterthought at best. It's been dumped. And I have to say, they'll end up in the same place. You might well argue they've ended up in the same place as Labour. They're an electoralist machine who, Tony Blair will say, yeah, I'm a socialist. I'm in favour of socialism. No, he does. I've seen him saying it. In 1,000 years' time, when you're ready for it, in the meantime, you'll do what I tell you. It's the same. The SNP is the same. They're in favour of independence in 1,000 years' time, etc., but do nothing about it today. It's tragedy. You don't get anywhere. You end up selling your soul, and you achieve nothing. So that's my view of that. They're not a unionist party. They're not a devolution party either. They're actually a social democratic party, but they're probably nowadays quite a right-wing social democratic party, because social democracy as an ideology is prepared to challenge capitalism and the power of capital by mobilising the masses. When was the last time you seen the SNP mobilise the masses? No, never happened, and they're out of the habit. Really good question, really important. It comes up all the time, doesn't it? And it's a bit chicken and egg. It's a bit saying, because the Scottish Socialist Party got this all the time through the referendum campaign, or that's to put it less than politely. We had to grapple with this issue put in front of us. Colin, we have to get independence first before we can get a republic. We have to get independence first before we can get socialism. We've got to have independence first before we can do anything about Gaza. We've got to do independence first before we can do anything about this, that and the other, right? And to be honest with you, the Scottish Socialist Party had to concede that point again and again, because in the independence referendum, the SNP was the biggest party, and you can choose to split and throw your dummy out the pram, or you go along with something that you're not particularly happy with, but you know that the bigger prize is more important than these small squabbles, if I can put it that way. And in truth, I regret it, because the fact is, you're not going to get independence unless you address these economic issues. It's not a chicken and egg, because that's an unanswerable conundrum, isn't it? Nobody knows what comes first. But to get independence, you're going to have to say independence is about X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, you're asking people to think in the abstract, and that's why we lost. We lost because we couldn't answer the question, or we refused to answer the question about a currency. I remember at the advisory board meeting, and Marlene's got this on camera many times before, I was on the Yes Scotland advisory board meeting. It was great, it was participatory, it was constructive, largely consensual. Myself, Dennis Canavan, Nicola, Patrick Harvey, Elaine C. Smith, Pat Kane, brilliant. And the issue came up. Osborne had been in Scotland on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, I remember it well. I was sending out all my cards. And he said, you can't have the pound. We're not going to let you. It was a total bluff. And what he was trying to do is to flush out the issue of the currency. And for me and Patrick, Dennis, Elaine, all the people that I mentioned before, our attitude is we need our own currency. An independent Scotland's got to have an independent currency. We're not having the euro, because that's decided by Brussels. You get no power. We could have the pound, but people are going to go to, hold on, that's their currency. The Bank of England set all the rates. Where's your independence there? You've got no influence, you've got no power. And we wanted to come out and say, no, we're in favour of our own currency. That's exactly what independence means. Be clear, be absolutely straight with people. And for reasons I'll not bore you with here, we had to compromise, because the SNP's least line at the time was, no, we're going to keep the pound, we can have the pound, as indeed we could have, but we shouldn't have. And we compromised. They were weighing up whether or not it took you onto territory that was bad or worse, and they stayed on territory that was worse. That was my view. Anyway, but the question is, and this is how I'd answer June by saying, my view is the independence campaign has to be clear about what it stands for rather than vague. If there's any question about what it does or doesn't support. So the answer to the question, because you're entitled to say, well, Colin, the independence movement would have to say at this stage, if we're going to the majority of people's point of view, that we're going to keep the king, because that's the independence movement's point of view. And in some regards, you have to compromise and say, okay, well, I don't like it, But the answer is that we say, right, an independent Scotland will have a referendum on a monarchy after we're independent. I mean, Alex Salmond's an honourable man, passed away, he's an honourable. His argument was it was irrelevant, and on the calculation it would draw down support. You'd lose more than you would gain from it, right? Perfectly legitimate argument to have, right? And by the way, I have to say, I was very fortunate. Remember the SNP had a debate about NATO membership? That's what you reminded me. The SNP's position for decades would be that an independent Scotland would not be a member of NATO, which they was considered at that time, or the argument for that point of view was that NATO was a warmongering product of the Cold War. And then Angus Robertson, I know Angus well, he'd probably accept this was the case. Angus came forward with the idea that that policy should be changed because it was an albatross round the SNP's neck. So they had a conference in Perth. This was during 2012 to 14. And I remember saying to Blair Jenkins at the meeting, I'd like to go to that conference. Is there any way I could go and watch that conference? Because it's a very heated debate. I'm thoroughly engaged in it. I'd be interested to know how it goes and the rest of it. And I remember Blair Jenkins saying, I've asked the SNP and you can't go. It's a party conference, blah, 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 you can't go. And I happened to bump into Peter Morrell. You know, Peter Morrell realises in some problems subsequently anyway. And he's like, yeah, no problem, Colin, I'll get you a ticket, come up and all that. So we were coming up as part of a lobby delegation from Edinburgh on a coach to lobby the conference to say, you need to keep this policy, NATO, we shouldn't have been, etc. And I managed, I got in, I got me a ticket, I sat at the back and he was sitting next to Keith, what's Keith's name, the Deputy Minister? Keith Brown was sitting next to us, and Keith happens to mention that he used to be in the Royal Marines, so he put me in my place, right? I says, I was only an altar boy. Anyway, but they had the debate and it was absolutely brilliant. It was a fantastic debate. It was a real tribute to politics because it was a private gathering. I was invited to sit there at the back and watch it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. No quarter was asked for or was given. It was a debate, it went on for hours, nobody getting guillotined or told, you run out of time, Marlene, none of that. It was great. And I remember many things about it. Three things strike me about that debate. It was a fantastic example of political debate at its best, right? No quarter given or asked for. I remember Kenny McCaskill, who's a friend of mine, Kenny, getting up and making an absolutely terrible contribution saying, yeah, we need to dump this policy because he was sick to the back teeth of being outside the chamber when we needed to be in and all that, right? I disagreed with him then, and Kenny and I are allowed to disagree with one another. I remember Sandra White making a contribution on the other side of the debate, which was terrific. Probably thought it was terrific because I agreed with her, which she should keep the policy, etc. Anyway, they go to the vote. And Alex Salmond was the convener, leader of the SNP at the time, and he was at the top table. They'd positioned it's a big stage, and they got all the leadership on the table, right? And so the chair, it was Derek Mackay, I think was the chair. Anyway, all those in favour, and Alex Salmond puts his horn up right in the middle of the table to let everybody know, hey, you know. I'm the leader and I'm wanting this and all that, right? Puts up his hand, right? So he counts all the votes. All those against, oh Christ, it was close. You're like that, oh, not sure how it goes. So they eventually count the vote, and there was only about 30 votes in it, about 600 people there. And the SNP changed its policy to be in favour of NATO, right? Which I regretted, and that's up to them, it's their decision, etc. But it was a brilliant example of a debate, and that's how politics should be. Everybody entitled to have their say was respected. Obviously, on this occasion, the SNP machine was working like a linty, getting all their votes out and delivering all the votes, etc. And they changed it. And I regret it. I think that's wrong. I think an independent Scotland shouldn't be part of NATO. We shouldn't be part of an alliance that organises warfare, an organisation that, in my view, should have been wound up when the Cold War was over. Now it's still going. And apparently we're in favour of wars in Ukraine and God knows where else, etc. But to answer your question, my feeling is the independence movement has to answer these questions specifically, so that when you go to the wee woman in Drumchapel, say, what's going to happen with my pension? This is what's going to happen to your pension. And by the way, a pension that in the past few years you've had to work longer for, pay more into, and get less out of. No, we're not having that, because we're going to look after people who contributed to this country for 40 years as a working person, and we're going to treat them with respect, and they get the rewards they're entitled to. Including, by the way, we'll have a national care service, like the National Health Service, that's free at the point of need. No having to sell your house to look after your care. you know, and that the quality of the care be fit for the 21st century, and the women largely who work in it are getting a proper wage for a job that's held in high regard. You're looking after the most precious members of your family. That's the kind of service we want. And to my mind, if people vote against that, well, fine, vote against it. If that's the kind of Scotland you want, then you're miles far. You know, I'm not in favour of winning votes by deception. This is what we're for. That's what it'll mean. You're perfectly entitled to ask me. This is what it means. If you want to vote against it, fine, that's democracy, I'll live with it. But I'm not going to sell you something that's, well, it might be this, it might be that, ask somebody else later, etc. You know? I'm a Marxist, I'm a socialist who believes in the material conception of history, which means that history is changed by people's material conditions and their consciousness about that. So you're more likely to be a socialist if you're struggling constantly to pay your rent, to raise your kids, etc. It's not a direct coalition. Some of the poorest people I've known are voting for reform in Hamilton this weekend. No, it's about class consciousness, it's about consciousness. And therefore, my view is that and I think the evidence points in this direction. 2014, remember the 4 areas who did vote yes? So the point is, these were 4 of the poorest areas of Scotland. The correlation here was that Glasgow, Dundee is considered the poorest city in Scotland. Dundee was the biggest yes voting area in terms of the percentage difference, right? Glasgow, Dundee, I think it was North Lanarkshire, Marlene can check this out, and certainly Western Bartonshire. And on the scale of things, these are the areas that are the poorest in Scotland amongst the most multiple deprivation, etc. The areas corollary that voted the biggest number for no: Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Perthshire, Eastwood area, what do you call it? West Renfrewshire, etc., Eastern Bartonshire, the leafy suburbs, etc. There's an evidence base there that you have to look at, which is to say, and I find this, I'm sure you must find this to be the case, the biggest supporters of independence in Scotland are the working class. No, but in Glasgow, you can point to the poorest areas of Glasgow, even in the city, and point to the areas that voted yes. The poorer areas of Edinburgh didn't vote no. They voted yes. Where I live in the south, it's not complicated, it's multifaceted. But the trouble is, the argument that you're getting in there culturally is self-defeating for us. It's self-defeating. My attitude is, if you're in Scotland, you're Scottish. You're Polish Scottish, you're English Scottish, you're Irish Scottish, you're Ukrainian Scottish, you're Scottish. If you live here and you contribute taxes and you're trying to build this country, well, we differ. And differences of opinion are a good, healthy thing. I'm not going down the path, which, and I have to say, neither are you, to be fair, but remember in the past, there was a tendency way before the referendum, the English. Waste of time, that argument. Absolute waste of time. There isn't such a thing as the English. There isn't such a thing as the Scottish. We're a nation of 5 million individuals. They're a nation of 60 million individuals. There are people. Do you know what I mean? So the attitude is, and I have to say, we were never, I don't remember the Yes campaign ever being accused of being anti-English. And rightly so, because we're not anti-English, we're pro-Scotland. We want to see our decisions taken ourselves. But the point I was going to get at, Sheena, was the British state. It's really important. No, I think I emphasised, possibly overemphasised, they're our opponents. That's who we're up against. But it's also fair to say the British state has never been in bigger trouble than it's in just now. And there's many, many pieces of evidence for this, right? But reform is one of them. If you look at the polls today, the Tories are in danger of being 4th. They're at 16% of the vote. And you can, you know, I'm sure everybody in this room is probably start a raffle. How long does Kimmy Badenoch last? See if she's still here by the weekend. She's a goner, isn't she? She's dead as ditch water. And the Tories will go through that process. Remember when Blair was the Labour leader? The Tories had 5 leaders, one after another. You don't remember them. You know, William Hague, Ian Duncan Smith, this Haddy and that Haddy. They're going to have 5 Haddys before they even recover, and maybe they won't ever recover.
And until Blair, there had never been a Tory leader who hadn't become Prime Minister.
Well, we had Blair, he was a Tory leader. But anyway, so my point is, and this is dangerous territory, I accept that completely. Socialists like me have been predicting the collapse of the British state for a century, so you have to be careful of crying wolf in that, you know. But it's true, because see, one of the reasons I think we're watching the rise of reform is Farage's argument, twofold, really clever. First thing he says is Britain is broken. And everybody's like, oh, damn right it is. NHS, worst crisis it's ever been in. Social care's broken. Economy's broken. The justice system's broken. The railways are broken. The roads are broken. Bloody everything's broken. So he's right. And then his second part of his slogan is Britain needs reform. This is all over Hamilton. Got big billboards, electric boardwalk. And I'm like that. See if he took that big R and he changed it to a wee R. I agree with him. Britain needs reform. The difference is, what kind of reform? His reform is, he wants to get the opportunity to blame immigrants for everything. It's an anti-immigrant thing. Immigrants, if they went home, there'd be more space in the motorway. If the immigrants went home, there'd be more space in the hospitals. If the immigrants went home, we could look after our parents better. Garbage, absolute garbage. And by the way, always been garbage. It's been trotted out many times before, right? But the point is, at root, this is about the British state is in decline. And if I can use this point, I think it refers to Tom's reference earlier on where you talked about devolution party. Jim Sillars, a friend of mine who I meet from time to time for coffee, was telling us that Lord Salisbury, I don't know who Lord Salisbury is, Lord Snooty. Lord Salisbury's placed a bill in the House of Lords that sits there to be used when and if necessary. It's his bill, and it's essentially what you would call Devo Max. He's basically got a bill there that they'll say, in the event that they need it, and they don't need it just now because their attitude is there'll not be any pressure to have a second referendum. But if they have a second if they're forced into this mass campaign of mass civil disobedience, they'll lift this bill and put it in the Commons to say, right, tell you what we'll do, we'll have Devo Max, which says Holyrood can have all the powers that you're asking for, except for macroeconomic policy and defence. What do you say? And I think Jim's right when he says they'd be quids in. That would get voted through at Linty. Independence or virtual independence without, aye great, have that tomorrow without a fight. And that's a tactical masterstroke by them. But of course it means that we've got to build up the pressure for them to need it in the first place. On Marlene's question C about the Labour Party, I'm no surprised about the Labour Party. I think Keir Starmer, is an affront to the word Keir, isn't he? I mean, he named after Keir Hardie.
He said he couldn't remember.
He'd be as well calling him Oliver after Oliver Hardy. I'm not surprised by Labour because they got elected last July on the basis that they weren't the Tories. People are sick to the back teeth of the Tories. And by the way, I have to say this is a phenomenon we know only too well because it's the reason the SNP get elected in Scotland time after time after time. We hate the Tories, we're voting for the SNP. Why? Because the Tories hate the SNP, that's good enough for me. Now they're voting for reform because Labour hates reform. The Tories hate reform. The SNP hate reform. Well good, I hate all of them, I'm voting for reform. It's pathetic, right? But it's what's happening. And I have to say about reform, I don't know, I haven't got any great skills, I don't have a crystal ball or anything like that, but I fear that reform's going to be second next Thursday. And actually the question for us in the independence movement is we have to grapple with what does the rise of reform represent for us as independence supporters? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Or to fudge the question, is it a bit of both? Because reform, remember, are ultra-unionists. Farage is an ultra-English nationalist. He's an ultra-English nationalist whose attitude is independence. You'll get hee-haw. So they're rising in polls. And by the way, I don't see how you can draw the conclusion, and it's one we're reluctant to do. But it's obvious some people who voted yes in 2014 are voting for reform. You can't... What does that tell you? Well, the funny thing is, Farage, he's describing himself as the party of working people. No, but the thing is, with Farage, this is a party reform. They've got 250,000 members, largely who came from the Tory party. But their voters are coming for the Labour Party. I was saying to Mary, I went to the Durham Miners Gala. You ever been to the Durham Miners Gala? Fantastic, absolutely brilliant, man. The biggest trade union celebration in the Western world. When I was there was about 200,000. And the year before, when Mick Lynch had been the tradesman strike, it was about 250,000. Anyway, I went there, I told my wife about it when I came home, and she says, we'll go to Durham for the weekend. Durham's supposed to be lovely, got a big cathedral, that kind of. So we went, and near Durham there's a thing called the Beamish Industrial Museum, fantastic and all that. And the wee village right next to it, it's a museum the olden times, wee village, and it used to be a pit there, and used to be, it's like, I don't know, 200 years ago. And the town, small village next to it is a place called Stanley. It's not really that important, except you remember this. Stanley, the pit there, had a banner, and on the banner they had a picture of Keir Hardie, Karl Marx and Lenin. They were communists. They were proud communists. So proudly communist that they named the streets Lenin Terrace, Keir Hardie Avenue, Karl Marx Crescent. No find these street names anywhere else in Britain. You certainly won't find them in Scotland, etc. I'm telling you this because I'm such an anorak. I took Zilla and goes, take my picture next to Lenin. So I'm standing in this woman's front garden looking like a haddy, Lenin Terrace and all that. She's going, what you doing standing in my garden? I'm going, I just wanted that street name. And all right. And I says to her, who's that guy Lenin? No idea, son. No idea. Tragic. Anyway, tragic. But here's the rub. See, 3 weeks ago, Stanley voted for 4 Reform councillors. The whole village voted Reform. The whole of Durham, the Durham coalfield was the reddest of red, made Red Clydeside look like they were pink. And they all voted for Reform. Reform now runs that council. So Reform and Farage is going about saying, I've done in the Tories, now I'm coming for Labour. And so they get 670 councillors elected in one day. They won that by-election in Runcorn and Cheshire, the 5th safest Labour seat in Britain. And they got 3 mayors elected. And by the way, they're talking about getting 16 MSPs elected next year to Scottish Parliament. This is like the COVID has come back. It's like a virus. And there's reasons for it, which is basically saying Britain is broken, and he's right, and everybody agrees with him. Britain needs reform. In his case, Reform UK, you can see what he's doing there, right? And he's that's right too. Plus they're novel, plus people hate Labour, plus people hate the Tories. They think the SNP's been in power at Holyrood for 18 years, what have they done? Fuck it, I'm going with these guys. That's it in a nutshell. The honest response to the rise of reform is to say that independence offers the way out of the hole that you're in. Farage is basically saying, look, Britain's broken. We agree with that. We're independence supporters. That's why we want independence. Britain needs reform. Well, what kind of bigger reform is there than independence? We take our own decisions. We say, let the rest of Britain go down the sewer. Let Keir Starmer have his hindmost and the rest of it. And actually, this is what this, I hope, I don't get the right to determine it, but I hope the Scottish Parliament elections next year become a polarised choice between we go down that path where we're going to blame immigrants. It used to be the Irish and the Jews, and now it's the blacks and the Islam. You know, we go down that path that he's going to take you down, which is to say we're going to blame immigrants for all the problems, or we're going to say, do you know what? We're going in a different direction. We're going to do exactly what you were saying there before. And that happens to be the polarisation of the Scottish Parliament elections, that people say they're going to get 15 or 16 MSPs if you just let these people open the door. If you're saying you don't like the SNP, Labour, etc., you're voting for reform, then it's your job to let you know what reform stands for. And by the way, the more we do that, the less their support lasts. Because the problem Farage, or the advantage rather, that Farage has got just now, MD can be a ginner. You ever seen you know that film Primary Colours with John Travolta and Emma Thompson in it? There's a line in it there. I think it might have been Travolta himself. He said, and remember this, any fool can burn down a barn. And to me, I've always thought that's profound. What he's basically saying is, any idiot can tell you what's wrong. Any fool can burn down the barn. But it takes somebody with intelligence to build a barn, to build a country, to build and improve. Farage is a destructive influence. All he's saying is destroy this, destroy that, destroy the next thing, right? And we're like, tell you what, that'll achieve hee-haw. And by the way, he'll never get there anyway, because he'll burst the organic composition of reform. They're utter head-the-boss. Have you seen that guy Rupert Lowe and all that? Half of them used to be in the British National Party. And by the way, what do you think they're saying? Imagine we're in a reform. Imagine this is the Glasgow branch of reform. Hey, that Farage yesterday said we're a workers' party. Fuck that! We're no workers. I own my own business and all that. Internally, they'll burst. They'll burst because it's a massive contradictions, right? That's not going to last. But they're probably going to last another year. That's the bad news. So I think our job, Jean, is to say independence is the way forward here. And not only all of a sudden it's came from being, it wasn't as relevant as you felt it was, to all of a sudden these people are coming up your garden path and they're going to blame your next door neighbour for all the problems that they cause because he's from Ireland or wherever else. I mean, where did I read it? Where is it? Oh, it's the UKIP. Remember them? The UK Independence. They're standing in Hamilton, believe it or not. Anyway.
Against reform, then.
Aye. Oh, so it shows you how they're away with the fairies. But they put out a leaflet saying, we guarantee to deport 500,000 people. Put us into power and we will guarantee to deport. And so what they're doing, it's an illustration, is they're now competing with Reform. In the same way that Katie Beaconock, what's her name? Badenoch is now, she's competing with Reform. And by the way, so Starmer, what a statement last week to say we're becoming a nation of strangers. That's Enoch Powell. That's Enoch Powell's language. That's what he's saying. This is Keir Starmer. He's pandering to them. And I don't know if you've seen this. I read the Financial Times and I know it's £3.70 because I buy it twice a week at least. You should buy it. There's a really good article in there today. You know, Starmer was supposed to fly to Germany yesterday to meet that Chancellor Merck's guy to discuss Ukraine and what they're going to do. Cancelled it and went to St Helens in Lancashire yesterday to a factory to give a speech attacking Farage. That's how frightened they are of Farage. So you've got the opinion polls, I think, came out today. Farage is in 31% across Britain and Labour's in 21%. The Tories are in 16%, right? So Farage is up here and Labour, the strategists are saying we need to attack Farage. In other words, but they're not going to attack him on the basis of his politics. They're trying to steal his vote away from him. So they're saying he thinks everybody's racist, we'll be racist. He thinks everybody hates immigrants, we'll hate immigrants. We'll tell the immigrants, look, you better absorb into our culture, etc. Otherwise we're going to fire you at the door. That's Farage's language. In other words, it's a catastrophic mistake of tail-ending reaction. And this is your point, June, about what happened to the left. Labour tail-ended reaction. They went after it. They think the best way to defeat somebody is to imitate them. That's what they did. That's why Labour's in the absolute position it's in today. Instead of saying this is what we stand for, and it'll be events in history that determines whether who's right or no, won't be an election or an election the day tomorrow, etc. History will determine. I think Malcolm X said, history will absolve me. Whether I'm right or I'm wrong, history will determine. And that's what Labour should have been doing. They should have been standing their ground. They should have been fighting. They should have supported the miners. They should have supported the anti-poll tax campaign. They should have been against the war in Iraq. They should have been against the cuts to single parents. They should never have cut benefits. They should never have cut the winter fuel allowance. All of a sudden, people are like, bye-bye Labour, can't rely on you. Keir Hardie turn in his grave, you're a disgrace. We're going for independence. And by the way, that could work because Farage won't support independence. Labour won't support independence. So all of a sudden, the raison d'etre for a different journey, for the 5 million of us, we can say, check that, we're off. We're going somewhere else. This could be a massive opportunity for the Yes movement. But the leadership, it has to dawn on them that's the direction you go in. I'm the Daily Record coming out yesterday and saying you should vote for the SNP to stop reform is the death knell for Labour. That's the in-house Labour paper, right? But what kind of opposition to reform is John Swinney going to offer? That's the question. It's you either offer opposition, uncompromising, absolute opposition. You're not going to come here and blame immigrants, whether they're Irish in the past or the Muslim community in Glasgow or anywhere else, or any other group of people who are coming here in search of a better life. You know, we're the country, the clearances. People forced out of Scotland to seek a better life in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, whatever. We're one of the countries in the world should know more than anybody what it takes, the courage and the nobility to take yourself, root yourself. I'm off. I'll never see my family again for Wester Ross because they're in Canada. People who come into Scotland and do that, first of all, they're bringing their wealth and their talent to our country. Brilliant. We should be welcoming that with open arms. And secondly, we should recognise that's a brave and courageous thing to do. They come here, they don't even speak our language. Well, standing, probably quite a few. How many are going to get elected really depends on what you said there. Yeah.
You're out there doing our
No, no. And as Jean said, by the way, I suppose if you push me, my sense is that you're going to find it easier than it's been in the run up to the Holyrood elections. I think there's going to be, it's like, what did they call it, the whip of counter revolution, or the sort of the threat of a dark force coming. Right, reform are on the rise in Scotland. The idea that this is an English and Welsh phenomenon, I'm afraid, is dead in the water. You're about to see that next Thursday. Watch to see what they get, 24% or something like that, and they've got defections for Glasgow councillors for the Tories, etc. This is a phenomenon that exists in Scotland. Scotland's every bit as broken as Britain, and it's in every bit as need of reform as Britain. Right, so that'll come here. I'm hoping that for us who support independence, we've tended to be treated to a dismissal on the one hand because we're not on the electoral plane. Well, the Scottish Socialist Party don't get invited to the meetings before. When I talk about the Yes Scotland Advisory Board, Angus Robertson, who was involved in setting it up, I meet with Angus and I say, so what's the plan? The referendum's coming. How's the Yes campaign going to be organised? We're setting up a Yes Scotland Advisory Board, but the Scottish Socialist Party won't be on it because you've not got any elected representatives. That was his point of view, point blank. And I said, but the Scottish Socialist Party was part of the Scottish Independence Convention. We're known out there. We're in the streets, etc. We speak for a constituency, if I can modestly say it, that nobody else speaks for, etc. I think you're making a mistake. But hey, I've got no power to influence you. About 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from a guy that I'd never met before called Blair Jenkins. Can I meet you for coffee? Yeah, well, no problem. Who are you? I'm taking over as the chief executive of you.
Yes.
And so he meets me, a nice cafe in Edinburgh. We had coffee and a blether. And he says, look, I'm taking over, and I've told Angus that the Scottish Socialist Party has to be involved, right? And I remember realising, I wasn't born yesterday, if you're going to try and establish yourself as the head cheese, you've got to be able to say I told Angus. I just told Angus. No, Angus, that won't be it. We've got to have Colin involved and all that. And he says, well, so will you get involved? I says, well, I'll have to talk to the Scottish Socialist Party about it and all that. So we talked about it and we agreed that we would, because there was a trap for us. That's not easy for the Scot. It wasn't a straightforward decision, because when you're involved in a collaboration, I'm sure it's the same yourselves. You have to give and take with each other. And we're like that. We're an anti-capitalist party. The Greens and the SNP are not anti-capitalists. The Greens, I don't think, are they in favour of Republic? Can't remember.
Yes,
but there's right? Well, so we were involved in the SNP one. So you have to work on the basis of, well, yes, Scotland was a advisory board that didn't have any power, and its decisions would be sought to be, consensual. And I'm like that, okay, that's fine. We get the chance to put our point of view, and then everybody else votes against it. What do we do? And we voted on balance that there was a danger of saying, the Scottish Socialist Party don't work with MD, throw their babe, rattle out the pram. So we decided to be part of it, and so the choice we had to make throughout was saying we have to work constructively with other people that we don't agree with. That's a strain. That takes a strain, particularly inside the party. What are we getting out of this? And we weighed it up on the basis we were getting invited to lots of meetings to speak in platforms and explain the point of view, like I've done today. But in recent times, all the invitations have drawn up. They've dried up. The MSPs, we are not in an alliance with the Greens and the SNP running the Scottish Government, are we? It's like, all of a sudden Cinderella doesn't get any invitations to the ball, right? But that to one side's not primarily important. I'm hoping that in the run up to next year's Scottish Parliament elections, the Scottish Socialist Party has made it clear, we've announced publicly we're standing in all the 8 regions of the country, putting candidates forward, and we're hoping to get elected. We're not doing it as any kind of gesture. This is done properly. And that's why we're standing a candidate, Colette Bradley in Hamilton. We stood in the by-election, you probably wouldn't have noticed it because it's not as important to you as it is to me, but it was a by-election for the council here in Govan Hill a few weeks ago, and the Scottish Socialist Party gets 7.5% of the vote, which is enough to get an MSP elected in the city of Glasgow and in Lothians and elsewhere. If we were to get 7.5% in the 8 regions, we get 8 MSPs. So we're hoping that Govan Hill result is a harbinger of what's to come. That's what we're looking for to get from Colette next week too, and that will set us in the path for Holyrood next year. So, and I think everybody in the independence movement accepts, and I'm delighted to hear it, that the Scottish Parliament is far, far stronger, better, more democratic, more representative with the Scottish Socialist Party in it. and so that's what we're trying to achieve.
If you get elected, you'll be swearing allegiance to King Charles.
Yeah. My kids tell me that I shouldn't swear so much, but I'll be doing that. I'll be, and I'll not be going to his garden party.
I couldn't do that.
You know, when we're in there, you get invited to the garden party, and this letter comes through, and it's like embossed and all that, and handwritten and all that. Mr. and Mrs. Fox, you know, you're invited to the Queen and Prince Phil would like you to come to the Holyrood garden party and all that stuff, right? And I got that letter, and no long after I got elected, and my mum was helping me with my post, right? And I seen it, and I gave it, Mum, could you open that for us and all that, right? And she opens it, oh, the Queen's invited you to the Holyrood the garden party and all that. She goes, what will you wear? I goes, well, I'll wear, Mum, I'm not going to that. So, she would have went.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, my pleasure.
I wish we'd had longer. It was very, very interesting.
You can have me back anytime, yeah.
Yes, and I hope some of your folk get elected. I really do. I like the Rainbow Parliament.
Well, me first.
I hope loads of them get elected.
Well, I hope
Correct.
so. I hope there's a lot of pro-independence parties get elected and not just the SNP.
The more we get elected, the quicker independence comes then. Exactly, that's it.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to make sure you're following us and subscribe to us, then you get notified every time we put something new out, so you don't miss anything. That would be great. Also, you can click the little bell if you're watching on YouTube.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website, and we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.